Okay, first off, hate speech laws shouldn't exist at all. They're anti-freedom, they're overbearingly motherly, and they're only appropriate in societies governed or populated solely by children. And I mean that in regards to both people offended by certain words and to people who too readily want to use certain words that they know are offensive, right? Adults should know better than to say mean things for no reason, but we're also only human, and no one should be arrested or fined for saying mean things, because sometimes mean things are actually the appropriate thing to say. That all said, whether we like it or not, the entire world is forced to tiptoe around America's oversensitivity toward the N-word, even though it's not close to the most offensive or dehumanizing thing that someone can be called. In fact, given the historical context and even the present-day context, I contend that Nazi should be considered the real N-word. I mean, just for reference, consider that according to the definition found in the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate speech can be defined as any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are. In other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor. Now, here in South Africa, political affiliation is listed as one of the characteristics protected under hate crime and hate speech laws. So I imagine that a legitimate case could feasibly be made against an individual who's too cavalier about calling people Nazis. But in the States, things are a bit trickier. They don't have hate speech laws per se, which I agree with, but speech is heavily policed by the populace and private entities, and since a culture is America's most powerful export, we exist in a world in which no one can say the N-word that has almost no significance outside of the United States, but everyone feels free to bandy about the far more offensive N-word that has far more historical and contemporary context for a far greater number of people. And if you don't think that Nazi is the more offensive term, you simply need to pull your socks up and pay more attention in class. Considering the historical horrors associated with Nazi Germany, both those that they committed and those that were committed against the German people in retribution, and the general disdain with which they are viewed, being called a Nazi is not only an insult, but it dehumanizes the individual to the point that he or she is considered by some to be a fair target for violent retribution. Also, bear in mind that pretty much any and all white people have the Nazi accusation leveled against them. While it might be reasonable not to accuse non-whites of Nazism, it's also really not fair to lump all pale skins in with the behavior of German supremacists from almost a century ago. It would be like judging all the world's black people by the standards of the Rwandan genocide, or all East Asians for the atrocities committed by the Japanese during the Second World War, or everyone of Arabian descent for the Arab and East African slave trades. It's so blatantly racist that it actually boggles the mind, and it clearly illustrates that the only white supremacy of any significance is that assumed by the people who literally think that whites are responsible for everything and are thus to blame for everything. People who unironically think like that clearly think that to be white is to be superhuman, an Übermensch, if you will. And since their only reason to think like that is to give themselves someone to blame and hate for what's gone wrong in their own lives, I think that the term should be regarded and rejected in intent as hate speech. And it should be received in much the same way as throwing around the other N-word currently is. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got to say about that. If you want to hear more, hit like, hit subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Cheers.